For anyone concerned about reforming our flawed justice system, these are challenging times, and that probably puts it mildly. Our new president and our new attorney general have come into office brandishing the kind of tough-on-crime rhetoric we haven't heard for a decade. Not only do both seem committed to reversing what was a clear trend to address the many recognized inequities in the system, from mass incarceration to biased policing, but they base their approach on misleading or inaccurate data. In the justice business, there's no place for alternative facts. At John Jay, our world-class faculty and research centers have made it their central mission to identify and apply evidence-based solutions to our real-world problems. So it's a special pleasure today to introduce you to two groundbreaking new developments at the college which continue that important work. In July, the Research Network on Misdemeanor Justice was launched with a grant from the Laura and John Arnold Foundation to take a focused look at how low-level offenses are enforced in 7 cities. And last fall, the Institute for Innovation in Prosecution was created with the support of Manhattan DA Cy Vance to apply the same evidence-based approach to an exploration of the changing role of prosecutors in American justice. We're honored to have with us today the prime movers behind both centers. First, I'd like to welcome Preeti Chauhan, the lead researcher in the Misdemeanor Network and an assistant professor of psychology at John Jay. Dr. Chauhan, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve.
So let's talk a little bit about the Research Network. Why was it formed?
The Research Network is an extension of the Misdemeanor Justice Project, which we formed about 4 years ago, focusing on New York City and New York State when possible. And we started it with the idea, Jeremy Travis and I started it with the idea that there's a lot of public attention and scholarly attention on felony arrests and serious crimes, but very little on lower level offenses like misdemeanor arrests, criminal summonses, and even pedestrian stops.
And we define those how? What's a typical misdemeanor or lower level offense?
A typical misdemeanor can be anything from a simple assault to petty larceny to turnstile jumping. Or marijuana arrests.
So what we used to call quality of life offenses?
Some quality of life and some that what we would say involve a victim, but the others that don't. And then summonses are given for behaviors such as open containers or public urination or disorderly conduct.
So is the premise that we have focused too much on these quality of life offenses, thereby giving people a record that they shouldn't have? Because they've been presumably seen earlier as kind of gateway offenses. If you catch the misdemeanor offenders, you'll stop serious crimes down the line. Is that no longer the assumption?
Well, that's not the assumption we work off of. What we work off of is there's not a whole lot of good quality data out there to really understand this massive footprint of the criminal justice system. So we don't know how misdemeanors have changed over time and what happens to them. What are they given for? Who are they given to? Same thing with criminal summonses. So what we set out to do is just put objective data out there, a lot like what the Bureau of Justice Statistics does as a national level. We wanted to do for New York City with these higher volume activities.
And why don't we have that data? That's surprising that we don't have that sort of data.
We have the data, or sometimes getting access to the data can be difficult, but there just hasn't been a focus on it until recently. And I think we started this 4 years ago before I think media and public started paying attention to behaviors like this. And now there's a real need for this kind of data, and people are really looking to try to understand these types of behaviors more.
So translate that for me. So analyzing the data will tell us what, basically, in terms of how effective, how efficient we are in justice systems in different jurisdictions?
What we do with the Misdemeanor Justice Project is we don't make policy recommendations, and we don't set out to try to explain why these behaviors are increasing or what impact it has on crime. What we really just try to do is put the data out there in front of the people that need to see it the most, so the practitioners and the policymakers, and hope that they use these data then to inform their own decision making.
What sorts of decision making? We're talking about sentencing guidelines. We're talking. I mean, who are the people who would use this data, and for what reason? Judges,
judges, the city council. So we released a report on criminal summonses. The mayor's office was doing some of their own data analysis on criminal summonses. And last June, the Criminal Justice Reform Act was passed, which basically gives police officers the option to give an administrative or a civil summons over a criminal summons for 5 behaviors.
I know you're not going to draw conclusions or making policy recommendations, but I mean, is the premise here that if the data tells us that more people than should be, or certain types of people, more African Americans, for instance, or more young people are getting hit with misdemeanor or summonses, that's bad for the system and that needs to change? Or is there some justification that you might find for why these types of offenses are being focused on by authorities?
Well, it's interesting, certainly from a court processing perspective and a financial cost perspective. So one of our results for criminal summons was that only 1 in 5 ended up with a guilty plea, which means there was a lot happening without a guilty plea.
That's in New York.
In New York, and arguments can be made. Well, that contact in and of itself might have prevented worse behavior, but what does that also mean for court processing? How much does that cost to process, say, 500,000 summonses at its peak, and only 1 in 5 of those are ending up with a guilty plea?
Right, but it's more than process we're talking about. We're talking about the impact on
the
young lives in particular of being stopped by police for whatever reason.
Right.
And is there a roadmap here that you think that you can lead to that will change that kind of formula?
What we would like to do ultimately is look at these data and then also follow it up with surveys. This is sort of in the future if we could get the money to do this, and look at questions of legitimacy of the criminal justice system among highly policed areas. Look at whether individuals who live in those areas are willing to report crimes if they're victims or witnesses. But what this data right now does is just document that over time. And one thing I should point out is that we found that young men of color were both experiencing the greatest increases in enforcement actions, such as misdemeanors and stops, but they also experienced the most massive decreases. So the question is, over that time, has the police legitimacy changed? And that question we can't answer.
So you're talking about New York City.
Yes, I'm talking about New York
But
City.
You're now widening your focus
Yes.
to look at other cities. So tell me about that. What are you looking at?
Yes,
With what end?
it's the same model that we've developed in New York. It's a research institution that works closely with data partners and stakeholders within the city to sort of provide basic statistics of what's going on. And we actually put out a solicitation. We got 39 applications, which I think demonstrates that there's a desire to examine these lower level trends over time. And the research network is now going to include 6 cities that'll join New York in looking at this lower level offending. And what we hope to do is also do some cross-site analyses to see how these 7 cities stack against each other over time.
And what cities are they? Tell us.
They are Los Angeles, Seattle, Toledo, Ohio, Durham, North Carolina, St. Louis, Missouri, and Prince George's County, Maryland.
Well, that's quite a diverse mix.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, can we really glean some comparative data from cities that are so different, basically, in their makeup?
It's going to be challenging, and I think that's one of our goals, is to figure out where the comparisons can be made and where they can't be made. But certainly what we can say is locally these analyses will be very informative for what's happening within their own jurisdiction.
Is the premise here that if we reduce some of the exposure of young people in particular to police action, that it will improve their lives further on as well as protect public safety? Or is that a balance that still has to be struck?
I think it's a balance that still has to be struck. I do wonder if the pendulum swung too far in one direction, and now we have to find that balance carefully.
Because we're very much talking about now in an era when the idea is that crime is increasing, that we're facing a new challenge in crime, even though the facts don't necessarily bear that out. But does misdemeanor justice tell us a little bit about that, and how accurate the facts we're using so far in designing policy make any difference to how we're going to treat young people or other people on the streets?
So what I can tell you from the New York City work is that we have experienced massive increases in misdemeanors, summonses, pedestrian stops, and then massive decreases from 1990 to then 2015, right? So increases and then decreases, but crime has consistently gone down the entire time.
So what does that tell us? What's the proof?
Well, I mean, we try not to make, but it seems that these increases and decreases are not particularly related to the crime rate. There's a lot of factors that go into determining crime. It's not just arrests. But what we see here are these two parallel figures or numbers where crime is consistently going down and arrests are swinging up and down, pedestrian stops are swinging up and down, and summonses are swinging up and down.
Does it also change how police operate? I mean, is that be one of the bottom lines of this is that many police will automatically, whether it's because of racial profiling or fear or instinct, if they stop less people on the street for quality of life summonses, will that change their approach? And that's going to be a hard decision for them to make, and hard thing to convince them of, basically.
It is, but they're doing more mental health training. They're also focusing more on neighborhood policing. So we'll see how those resources are reallocated and what that means for the police officers in general.
I guess what I'm saying is an encounter does not necessarily mean an arrest or a summons.
No.
That's the point. In other words, if you can reduce the summonses that arise out of an encounter with
an
a
encounter
citizen.
could be a very positive thing for the person involved. Perhaps the encounter could lead to the person getting support services or going into a homeless shelter if they're homeless. It could be positive. It doesn't necessarily have to be a misdemeanor or a summons.
Yeah, well, we're going to be looking at the results of the Research Network over the next couple of years, I'm sure.
Yes.
Dr. Chohan, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Meg Reese, our next guest, is Executive Director of the Prosecution Center. She's a former Brooklyn and Nassau County prosecutor with more than 2 decades of courtroom experience. Meg, welcome to Criminal Justice Matters.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let me start a conversation with reading a letter that you wrote recently to the New York Times about prosecutors. And it says in part that prosecutors who want to lead can no longer allow their offices to operate as part of a justice system assembly line that has too often produced damaging results. Wow. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think we're all well aware of the issues in criminal justice now, and we know that for prosecution, and prosecutors are involved in every decision that happens in the criminal justice system if somebody ends up incarcerated. And so in order to address really what's going on across the nation, prosecutors need to start rethinking about the work that they're doing. So we know the recidivism rate for people that have gone through the criminal justice system is almost 70%. I think it's fair enough to say that the system is broken.
So why haven't we looked at prosecutors before? Did we just totally overlook it, or have we been looking at jails and corrections officials?
It's interesting
judges?
why, that's a very good question, why people haven't focused on the prosecutor. I think there's probably a lot of different answers to that question. I think people look, certainly as you said, people look at the police and certainly look at prison rate, but what happens in the middle hasn't really been focused on, which is the prosecutor. That could be that, one, people don't necessarily understand the role that the prosecutor has. Two, people, there isn't a lot of data out there about prosecutors, so there's not necessarily anything to look at. So I think those all contribute to why sort of the prosecutors have been left out of the conversation.
So you're calling your center the Institute for Innovation in Prosecution, but I mean, prosecutors are often elected, and when you're running for office or when you're in a political position, innovation does not play a great part if you're running for office again and trying to convince people to elect you. Right?
Well, I think one of the interesting things that we saw this last election cycle actually was very different from what happened at the national level, but at the local level, at the state level and the county level, we saw a lot of reform-minded prosecutors actually beating out long-term incumbents. So innovation, reform, progressive agendas really did take center stage in some counties across the United States.
So that's different from what we saw nationally. That innovation
very different.
And progressive reform was not part of the.
No, very, very different.
So what does that? Is there a split? I mean, are local jurisdictions more interested now in changing the way prosecutors work?
I think the trends that we saw related to prosecution, I think that's exactly what we did see. We saw a lot of trend towards progressive, reform-minded people taking office to try to affect change.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. There's a lot. Well, there's one that I think people are very, very familiar with is Kim Foxx in Cook County, Illinois. And the opposite end of the spectrum is Mark Gonzalez in Nueces County, Texas, which is Corpus Christi, Texas. Mm-hmm. He's an example of a young guy who has been a defense attorney his entire career and beat a long-term incumbent for the seat.
How much room will there be for innovation in prosecution under a Justice Department that is not necessarily, what shall I say, welcoming to that kind of innovation?
So I think at the local level, I think there can be, because prosecutors have so much discretion, they're, as you said, they're elected, and so they are their own, to the people, they respond to the people, and so especially those that have been elected on a reform agenda, they have a responsibility to carry out implementing those reforms. And even those that haven't, have been in office for a long time, they are responsible to the communities that they serve. And there is a lot of room for innovation. And the whole point and the impetus for the Institute for Innovation in Prosecution is actually to start getting the ideas out there about how they can innovate to improve the system, how they can change the language that they're using in prosecution and the systems that they're using in prosecution to actually affect change on the other end, reduce mass incarceration, reduce disparity in the system, move from a case processing model to a prevention model. That's what we're driving for with the Institute.
Well, it couldn't be a more timely moment.
No.
But give us some examples of what innovation would mean on a local basis. I mean, you mentioned some just a moment ago, but in order for prosecutors to be convinced of their validity, even if they're leaning towards that way, don't they need some evidence-based approaches to say, well, this will work, and this will, at the same time, fulfill my mandate to assure public safety?
Well, what they're doing isn't working. So that's one reason, right? The first thing to do is, one reason to try something new is because what you are doing isn't working. There's prosecutorial responsibility in mass incarceration. So prosecutors, one of the main drivers, arguably the main driver in mass incarceration is the sentencing on violent crime. And that's something that needs to be examined. There's a lot of data out there about the impact that that sentences after a certain period of time, the length of the sentence doesn't matter. People age in and out of crime. All of these things, there's so much evidence out there now. The science is out there now to show that what we have been doing isn't working. And now it's to integrate that science into practices. So if you're looking at sentencing someone who has committed a violent offense, then that's information that should be factored into those decisions. It shouldn't be that you charge out to the max, that you, as you know, the majority of cases are pled out, so very few go to trial, that you aren't making plea offers that are the max, if it's not going to enhance public safety and if it's not fair. The drivers are enhancing public safety and fairness.
Does it take a different kind of prosecutor to get in that direction? I mean, we're used to thinking of prosecutors as the most powerful people in the system. It's people live or die on the basis of what a prosecutor wants, and we've always heard that prosecutors, with an eye for politics, will always try to make sure that the felons, the bad guys, the bad dudes, and to coin a phrase, will go to jail and be put away and convince their electorate that they're doing a good job. That's a tough thing to change.
But so one of the first things to do is change the language, the bad dude. What does that mean? What are the circumstances of that person coming into the criminal justice system in the first place? And what is the background to that person? And is there a solution, alternative solution, for that person other than being incarcerated? So, that's one of the fundamental places we have to start, is what does that mean, bad dude? And should we use, I know you're joking, but should we use labels like that when you say people, violent people versus people that commit violence? This is something that John Pfaff has said many times in his book, which is newly out. But it's people have committed violence offenses, but it doesn't mean that person is permanently violent. And I think this is all part of the language that we need to consider that we use in the system.
Is it an uphill battle? I mean, we have a lot of progressive prosecutors and prosecutors willing to change out there, but Would you say the majority are still working under the old system? And it's an uphill
Look, any change
struggle?
on the individual level on anything is very, very difficult. But that's the challenge ahead for us.
So are you focusing on the prosecutors who are not necessarily people who are going to buy that argument and seeing if you can convince them?
I think we're focusing on the people that do understand it and for them to start implementing and having success. We're focusing on those that are interested in it but haven't necessarily fully understood how the science plays in, what the evidence is. And then, of course, we're always focused on the ones that aren't there yet. We're really focused on the whole community, prioritizing. We're going to try to have success and let that spread, because I think the most convincing piece of evidence for anybody is for someone to see a colleague in the field, another practitioner, having success, and then adopting those practices.
Would naming and shaming help? Would it help to have the 10 worst prosecutors out there?
Well, can I tell you know who's a perfect example? John Chisholm, of good,
John Chisholm of
reform-minded
Milwaukee,
prosecutors. Yes. But John Chisholm in Milwaukee, he was just up for re-election this last year. And as you know, he's a very reform-minded prosecutor who has always been at the forefront of change. And he had a very, very tough primary election where the other side funded another Democratic candidate against him, and he was successful. And he was successful on a reform agenda to beat his opponent.
But it has to complicate the environment now that we're in this political situation where the rhetoric is that we're in a worse situation regarding crime than we've ever been in before. Whether it's a fact challenge or an alternative fact or not,
right.
that is the zeitgeist.
Right.
That's something that you, I would assume, in your center, you're going to have to fight against.
Yes, except we're working with the prosecutors themselves, the practitioners, the electeds themselves. They know, and the ADAs in the office, or the deputy prosecutors in the office, they know what the true facts are. They know that crime isn't at its worst. They know crime is at an all-time low across the United States. So luckily for this conversation, when we're working directly with the practitioners, those type of alternative facts are not as relevant in the conversation, but we do have to give them the tools so that they can talk to their constituents to make them understand how that's not really the case.
So how will you know you're doing
that's the big question. You have to wait and see.
Well, how will you know you're doing a good job? That you achieve what you want to achieve as a center?
So that's an excellent question, and one we think about a lot. And I think we'll have success sort of on two levels. I think on the micro level, one of parts of our work, we have sort of three buckets of work in the ways that we're going to achieve this real culture change. I mean, we're talking about a change in the profession. And one is through action research, and where we're going to develop innovations, interventions, strategies that will work with local offices to implement, addressing procedural justice for prosecutors, addressing implicit bias in pretrial decision-making, and evidence-based strategies to reduce violence. The more we see at that local level those interventions being applied across the country, that will be one measure of success. And then I think the biggest measure of success, which might take a little bit longer, is to actually change the language and understanding that people have about prosecution, changing the language from a violent person to a person, changing how people, when a case comes in, rather than this, factory assembly line, to this is a person in front of us. What's the best way? Because the prosecutor represents all of the people. They also represent the defendant. And so the goal is to actually have safe communities, not against necessarily just this one individual person. And so that's our goal, is really changing the mindset around prosecution so that people think of it really in a holistic way and how it impacts communities.
May we wish you the best of luck. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
As anyone who's a regular watcher of criminal justice matters knows, opinions on criminal justice can be passionate. But strong opinions without facts to back them up are a dangerous basis for making policy. Our two guests today are among the many thought leaders who believe that facts still matter in criminal justice. And as we head into a new era, Criminal Justice Matters will continue to seek out the facts that can help you draw your own opinions. I hope you'll stay with us. I'm Steve Handelman. Thanks for watching. See you next time.